The City of Grand Forks Board of Equalization, Monday, April 20th, 2020 is hereby called to order. Welcome and roll call.
Weigel.
Here.
Dockler.
Here.
Weber.
Here.
Mock.
Here.
Marshall.
Here.
Sandy.
Here.
And Bean. We have a quorum.
Thank you. 1.2,
Consider protest recommendations from the city assessor on Menards Incorporated, 3550 32nd Avenue South, and Shields All Sports, 2800 32nd Avenue South.
Mr. Hodak.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the Board of Equalization. I'm sharing my screen now. Can you see my staff report? Okay. First of all, we have an appeal from Menards this year. That's Menards Inc. at 3550 32nd Avenue South. They're being represented by Daniel Willert, a tax manager from Ducharme, McMillan and Associates. And he's on the phone tonight. So I'll give the floor to him to make his presentation, and then I'll take it from there.
Okay, thanks, Paul. As Paul has stated, my name is Daniel Willert. I am with Ducharme, McMillan Associates, and we have appealed the Menards and Shields on their behalf. I just want to start off by thanking you for the accommodations and the willingness and letting me speak this evening. So as Paul stated, I'll go ahead and start with the Menards. Just to start, it's the building is approximately 162,340 square feet, originally constructed in 2001. There is a detached warehouse with approximately 48,821 square feet. So when we did our sales comparison, we compared the sales to the gross building area of the 162,340 square feet. And then we just added in a lump sum value for the warehouse at the end. So I'll go ahead and walk through the three approaches to value that we had completed. The first one is the sales approach. We researched sales between January 1st, 2016 and February 1st of 2020, which is the most recent valuation date. Considering the large size, we had to research locations across the Midwest. So we have included 11 fee simple comparable sales and then one listing in the comp grid that's been provided. The unadjusted sales price of the comparable properties range from $25.08 a square foot to $66.45 a square foot, averaging $36.75 a square foot. All of the square footage of all of the comparables was over 50,000 square feet, with the largest comparable having roughly 145,000 square feet. Adjustments were made pertaining to the difference in age, size, and land to building ratio. After the adjustments were made, the sales prices ranged from $23.99 a square foot to $69.31 a square foot, again averaging $36.75 a square foot. I gave primary weight to sales comps 1 and 2 since they are located in the same geographical region, especially the former Gander Mountain sale located in Fargo. So I reconciled a value of $60 a square foot, which equates to $9,740,400. I added in a lump sum value of $1,250,000 for the warehouse. The typical cost for Menards to construct the warehouses, approximately it ranges from $2.3 to $2.5 million. So I used the high end of the range. And then considering that the warehouse is approximately 19 years old on a 30 or 40 year life cycle, I assumed 50% depreciation and added a value of the $1,250,000 for an overall indicated value of $10,990,400. I wanted to touch on the fact that all of the comparables utilized were sold as vacant. Just because they sold as vacant doesn't mean that they were necessarily distressed. As you can tell, the market for retail properties this large is extremely limited. So more often than not, they are selling after the original user has vacated, even if or when bankruptcy isn't a factor. A great example is Sale Comp 7 in Blaine, Minnesota. It is a former Walmart that closed because they built a larger store just to the south of the site across the interstate, and then subsequently sold the building to another national retail chain, At Home Retail, which is like a second-hand store for furniture and things of that nature. So you do see these sales between retailers. It's rare, but it does happen. So it was a continued use as a retail operator. All of the sales transacted in the simple estate, free of any deferred maintenance or encumbrances. And then I also want to touch on the 2 empty big box anchors at the Columbia Mall. As everyone's well aware, both Macy's and the Sears have closed. The Macy's store did sell at an auction for $440,000. We obviously do not consider that a valid market transaction, so we didn't utilize it in the sales analysis. However, it is now for sale for $1.8 million. So at the absolute floor, that's at $18 a square foot. That's what a large big box retail is for sale in Grand Forks. Obviously, that building is much older than Menards, so it's not as comparable, but it's a large retail space that is for sale for $18 a square foot. I'll move on to the income approach. We were able to more regionalize this data a little bit better. So we were able to find leases of retail properties throughout North and South Dakota. And we reconciled a rental rate of $7.50 a square foot based on a triple net lease. Primary weight was given to lease comp 2 since it required the least amount of net adjustments and is located in Grand Forks. We concluded a vacancy rate of 10%. The attached realty rates suggested a vacancy rate closer to 6% for the Midwest as a region. However, given the size of the subject, there is a little bit of a greater risk. So we utilized the 10% vacancy. And then for the expenses, you have your typical, the insurance expense is reimbursed. So it's basically a net zero. And then you have your typical management fee. We utilize 3%. And then the owner would incur some repairs and maintenance and administrative expenses. We estimated those at 1% each. And then we included a replacement reserves line item because long-term items would eventually need to be replaced at the cost to the property owner. We estimated that at 62 cents a square foot, bringing the overall expense and reserves ratio to 16.8%. So the net operating income was $935,647. We utilized a base cap rate of 9%. Again, that's found by the attached realty rate survey that indicated 9.9%, as well as 4 recent sales of retail buildings in Grand Forks from CoStar that had an average of 8.5%. So we concluded a 9% cap rate. You have to factor in the vacancy cap rate or the vacancy loss of 10% versus the effective tax rate. So the Logan cap rate is 9.16% for a capitalized value of $10,214,482. Again, adding in the warehouse value, we arrived at an overall indicated value of $11,464,482. After the income approach, as a test for reasonableness, I conducted an equity analysis. What I did is just compare the assessment versus the assessments of the other big box retail operators in the immediate area, Lowe's, Target, Walmart, and Sam's Club. The same adjustments were made as the sales comparable. So after adjustments, the prices ranged from $53.22 a square foot to $67.13 a square foot, averaging $59.80 a square foot. Again, I added in the warehouse value as a lump sum value, and I concluded the same overall indicated value of $10,990,400. So in sum, both the market and the income approach support a lower value as further supported by the equity analysis. So we are respectively requesting an assessment of $11,200,000.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go through my analysis. I'm going to make some comments as to what I saw in their request and compare that to what I've done in our model. So right at the top of the staff report, I just want to point out that when this application started, I got a call from this tax rep requesting that I consider his information that he provided me. He sent me a sales comparison approach and wanted the value reduced to $10 million. I told him that I thought my value was fair and equitable and supported by the market, and that I didn't think an adjustment was appropriate, but if he wanted to appeal to the Board of Equalization, he could. He chose to do that, so 2 days later, I got another packet requesting that the value be lowered to 11.2 million. The difference between the two packets was the first one only had a sales comparison approach. The second one had sales comparison approach and an income approach. And I just want to point that out because it's just by introducing more data, more income data, it changed the value conclusion considerably. And I think that's important. So that's how this got started. This is our income approach. This is our 2020 value. That's the value I'm supporting. This value breaks down $3 million on the land and about 9.8 million on the buildings. Total value $12,856,300. We rely heavily on the cost approach for assessing. The reason we do is because, first of all, it breaks down the difference between land value and building value. So you can have an equitable value on your land from one parcel to the next. The other thing that the cost approach does is it creates equity. A property is priced based on its components. How big is it? How high are the sidewalls? How much asphalt is there? How much land is there? All of those things contribute to the cost approach. Now, we do have a tendency to temper our cost approach with our income, so we're not solely using our cost approach, but we use our cost approach to create equity, and I can show the equity that we have in this property as compared to like properties. So this is our cost approach breakdown. This is the building value. This is the warehouse value. So you can see my warehouse value and his warehouse value are very close to the same. This is just all the miscellaneous paving and asphalt paving that was added over the years. So that's broken down by age. Now in our commercial module, we also back up our cost approach with an income approach. You can see here, my income approach value is $12,813,500. Very similar to my cost approach. Interestingly enough, my base rate was $7. The applicant used $7.50. I used a higher vacancy rate than him. I think notably what you need to take away from our income approach is the NOI. Mine is $1,025,000. His was $935,000. So we're not that far apart on our NOI. And in the income approach, you take your NOI and you divide it by the cap rate, and it gives you an income approach value. It's the cap rate where we differ. You've heard me say that before. It comes down to the cap rate. And that's a good thing, because when we're talking about the cap rate being the biggest difference between me and him, what I'm saying is his data is supporting our NOI. Our NOIs are close. And so I think his data supports the fact that our model is hitting the market. Okay. So I want you to remember the 8% here and the $1,025,000. Those are two numbers I'll talk about later. We have a picture of the subject and a simple sketch. Now, here's the equity that I put together. You'll note that he did an equity approach and made the same adjustments in his equity as he did in his sales comparison approach. what we do when we're comparing equity, first of all, you have to take the land value out of it. You can see that Menards has a 670,000 square foot land. This one's got 463, 809. The land values are different in different places. On Gateway Drive, we're at $2 a square foot on the land. And we're at, 4.5 to 5.5 on 32nd Avenue, depending on the size of the lot. So you have to take the land value out of it to really compare equity, because the land is different. That's a location adjustment. Then what we do is we take all of the amenities and we deduct them from the improvement value to come up with a base value for the structure itself. So, we deduct for the lumber storage warehouse, for the garden center, for the yard improvements, the asphalt paving, the mezzanines. You deduct for all these extras. This is all information taken out of our cost approach. You deduct for all those things and we come up with this main building value per square foot. That's telling us that on Menards, I'm at 43, and on Lowe's, I'm at 4280. Those values are equitable. They're fair. Menards has more extras than Lowe's, and that's why Menards' value is higher up here. Menards has more land than Lowe's. That's why Menards' value per square foot is higher up here. When you break it down to just the land value, our values are fair and equitable. The outlier here is the Walmart North. That building value is higher because it's considerably newer and it has less physical depreciation. So in terms of equity, I think these numbers show clearly that our value is equitable compared to like properties in Grand Forks. Now this spreadsheet is showing how we compare to other Menards in the state. We have the newest Menards of this sample, and our overall value is the lowest. Our building value is kind of right in the middle. Per square foot basis, our building value is about right in the middle, but we have the lowest value of any of these. Again, fair and equitable as compared to like properties in other cities in North Dakota. That's the information I have to present. That's the information I used to value the property. I just want to make a couple comments on what I saw in his data. First of all, it's important to understand, it says right here that this is not an appraisal and he is not an appraiser. That is important. You need to understand that you shouldn't be treating this as an appraisal. He's not a licensed appraiser. So he's not being held to the same standard as an appraiser would be. In the sales comparison approach, a couple things that concern me here. I don't see any condition adjustment. I don't see any adjustment for a garden center. Menards has a 24,000 square foot garden center. Many of these sales comparables don't. That's a $500,000 swing one way or the other. So I don't see that. And I guess what bothers me the most about the sales comparison approach is I don't see a location adjustment. We have 12 comparables from 4 states and 11 cities, and there's no location adjustment here on any of them. That seems highly unlikely to me. I don't want to say it's impossible. I haven't done the research, but it doesn't compute. There's going to be location adjustments from one market to the other, and I don't see having that having been done here. So I would give very little credence to the sales comparison approach in either of these cases. Now, again, as I said earlier, on the income approach, our NOI, his NOI, we're not that far apart. I have a problem with a 16.8% expense ratio on a triple net lease. A triple net lease is transferring the bulk of the responsibility for expenses on the building to the renter, not the owner. And the owner would have some long-term expenses in terms of, maybe a roof repair, things like that. But the general maintenance, the insurance, the taxes, all of that is going to be paid by the renter. In our model, I used a 5% expense ratio. He's using 16.8. Now, I will say his rent, like I said, his rent was a little higher. His vacancy rate was a little lower. So I could see where maybe his expense ratio might be a little bit higher than mine, but I'm thinking 7-8% at the most. The other thing is replacement for reserves is accounted for here. He's also using realty rates as a source for his cap rate. We use realty rates. We have that service. But when you're using realty rate and you're taking replacement for reserves, you're double dipping on your reserves because realty rates capitalizes reserves. So you don't take reserves as an expense. Now I understand that he used 9 here and he probably blended the difference between the 8.5 and the 9.9 and he settled on 9. This is the realty rates that he submitted, and he's looking at these surveyed rates. Minimum surveyed rate is 4.78. The maximum is 13.31, and the average is 9.91. That's the number he's using. Well, so the range is 4.5 to 13.5. He settled on 9. I settled on 8. And if we go back to the income approach, you can see that the Grand Forks sales indicate a cap rate of 8.5. So I feel comfortable with that 8 to 8.5. Furthermore, when you look at the realty rates and you look at the overall rate here, which is a band of investment, that's taking into account what it costs to borrow money, what your equity is worth. The range on that is 4.5 to 14. But the overall rate is 7.9. And that's another way to calculate your cap rate. It's another way to look at it. So I'm looking at that and I'm saying that rate, 7.91, and the 8.5 from the Grand Forks sales perfectly supports my 8% cap rate. And I would also like in his equity analysis here, which is on my screen, I've got a problem with the average assessed value here is $60 a square foot, and he's applied that to show equity to the subject. But again, that's when you take the average, that's not the way you do this. You take the best comparables and apply a blended value. But when you're taking the average, you're giving as much weight to the poorest comparable as you are to the best comparable. So that's not the way this should be done, and I disagree with that. Having said all that, my recommendation, I'll take any questions, of course, but my recommendation would be to uphold the true and full value of $12,856,300 for the 2020 tax year.
Thank you, Mr. Hodak. Any questions for Mr. Hodak from the council? I would like to see the council so I can see if there are any questions.
Paul, can you stop your screen share, please?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Any questions from the council? Any comments from the council?
I'll move approval of staff recommendation.
Mr. Weber, motions approval, second. Mr. Sandy, motion second. Any further council discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Hodak. Mr. Hodak.
Yes, okay. So now I got to figure out how to share my screen again. Okay, can you see that? And we are on item 1.2B. Mr. Willert is again representing Shields at 2800 South Columbia Road. So I'll give the floor to him to make his presentation.
Thank you. Again, it's kind of it's the same layout for the Shields as it was for the Menards. The building is improved with a single tenant retail building, originally constructed in 1977, with approximately 114,743 square feet of gross building area. Again, we utilize a sales comparison approach. However, we just utilize three sales from the previous grid because it's more regionalized, similar age buildings. It's not as big of a property. So the unadjusted sales prices range from $27.39 a square foot to $66.45 a square foot, averaging $42.14 a square foot. Again, the same adjustments were made to the comparables. Previously, Mr. Hodick had made a comment about location adjustments not being made. I did look at that by comparing the land assessments. It's not a perfect way, but most of the land assessments were a little bit higher than the Menards, so the adjustment actually would have been a negative adjustment. So that's why I didn't include it, because I didn't want to make it seem that we were trying to get the lowest value possible. What we're trying to do is just, prove that just on the surface, a sales comparison, that this building is over assessed. So again, after the same adjustments were made, we came up with an average of $38.31 a square foot. Again, I showed the listing of the former Macy's for sale at $18 a square foot at the same mall. So we've concluded a value of $4,360,234 or $234. And then again, it's the same thing as the Menards. This one, though, I think it's a little bit more relevant. It's located at the same mall as two closed stores, one of them being for sale for $1.8 million. According to news reports, I saw that supposedly there was going to be a tenant in place in the former Macy's. However, I haven't seen anything where that has actually happened. So from my understanding, it is still vacant and it's still for sale for $1.8 million. And then I just compared the assessment of the Shields to the other three anchors at the mall. Again, reconciling $39 a square foot, which is $4,474,977. So based on the sales and the equity, we are requesting a value of $4.5 million.
Okay, thank you. I'll go through this a little more quickly than the last one. My value is 6.3 million. He's asking for a value of 4.5 million. In a nutshell, I think we have to remember that in 2011, Shields bought this building for $3.1 million, and over the next 2 years, put over $13 million into it. So you have a $15-16 million investment. I've got $6.5 million on this property. I'm not saying that cost and value are equal, not at all. I'm just saying that this property is in a very different place in its life cycle than Macy's and Sears are. This property is where, in 2010, this property is exactly where Macy's and Sears are today. So it has been completely renewed. I'm talking new HVAC, new roofing, paving. The whole thing was gutted. You've all been there. There's a 5,000 square foot restaurant added. None of that was talked about in this analysis. A $13 million investment, a 5,000 square foot restaurant, none of that was discussed in his analysis. So that's important. Again, here's our cost approach. Valuing the land and the buildings separately. My income approach, I use many of the same data points. I have a little lesser rate on this one in terms of the value rate per square foot than I did on Menards, and that's because it's tied to the mall. I used a little lesser rate to be a little more conservative, because anytime anything happens to these anchors on the mall is involved, and there's some control issues there. Having said that, my income approach is almost 7.1 million. My value is 6.3 million. As I'm looking at this thing, frankly, I think I'm low. Okay. Here's an updated picture, sketch. Again, here's the comparison, much like I did for Shield or for Menards. Again, you can see the value of the overall property per square foot. If you deduct the land value and take out all of the extras, it comes down to that base value per square foot. One of the reasons I think I'm low is my income approach and my cost approach spread is about $700,000. Secondly, my base value on Shields is just under $25 a square foot, and my base value on Sears is over 27. I think I should be higher on Shields than I am on Sears. The other thing I'd like to say about Sears is when you're looking at that Sears parcel, it doesn't have any parking. All the parking belongs to the mall. So the Sears parcel is unique in that it's only building. There's no parking lot. So it's different than these others. But when I look at these values, there's a wide range, but that's because some of these are standalone big box stores and others are mall anchors. I'm higher on Sears than I am on Shields. To me, that's an indication to me that my Shields value is too low. I can look at that for next year. Again, he's pointed out that this is not an appraisal and he is not an appraiser. I appreciate that, by the way. Most tax reps don't make that comment. He's only done a sales comparison approach in this case. And again, here's what he did. He took the sales comps, averaged it out, and then applied that average to the subject. And that's inappropriate. Again, no location adjustment here. No location, no condition adjustment. Those things are not appropriate in a sales comparison. Yes, Mr. Sandy.
Unless you have a lot more information to provide, I'd like to move approval of the staff recommendation.
Thank you. I'm good.
To have a motion, would you please screen share, Mr. Hodek? So Mr. Sandy makes a motion. Do we have a second?
Mayor Brown, could I just interject real quick? Just for the record, I just wanted to state, I see that Ken Veen has joined in progress and is present.
Thank you. So we have a motion before us by Mr. Sandy. Do we have a second?
Second. Ken, I'll second.
Okay, Mr. Veen seconds. Any further discussion? Thank you, Mr. Hodek and Mr. Willard. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. Next, we go to item 1.3.
Certified 2020 annual assessments to the county auditor.
Mr. Hodek.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. Here we have our 2020 valuation, $4,954,355,700. It's a 2.13% increase from 2019. And I would just ask that you certify that number to the county auditor for the 2020 tax year.
Thank you. Do we have a motion and a second from council?
So moved.
That Ms. Thank you. So who moved? Mr. Weigel motions, Ms. Mock seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, carries.
Aye.
Thank you. Carries, thank you. 1.4.
Annual report, which is information only.
So we receive and file that. Need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Ms. Mock motions, Mr. Weber seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, we stand adjourned as the Board of Equalization.
Mr. Mayor, if I could have a couple of minutes to get the city council meeting set up as far as presenters.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Bernstrom.
Thank you, sir.
Tell me when.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe we're ready to go now. Thank you.
Thank you. The City of Grand Forks, the proud home of the University of North Dakota City Council meeting Monday, April 20th, 2020 is hereby called to order. Welcome and roll call.
Weigel.
Here.
Buckler. Here. Weber.
Here.
Mock.
Here.
Marshall.
Here.
Sandy.
Here.
Devine.
Here.
All present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Under 1.2 Mayor's announcements, the Red River is behaving. It is now 36.5 feet. The city's mission continues to be protect and serve and listen during these extraordinary times. We're sorry to announce the passing of Sergeant Cliff Phelps, a 32-year veteran of the Grand Forks Police Department, serving from 1971 to 2003. And Kenneth Schultz, former public health director, serving a total of 29 years in the Department of Health. Also, COVID-19, Grand Forks has become a hot spot. Please follow CDC guidelines and stay home. Wash your hands, cover your face, and keep physical distancing. It's important now more than ever. We're in this together and we'll get through this together. So now we go to item 2, awards, presentations, appointments, and proclamations, 2.1.
Flood update.
Mr. Grasser.
Thank you, Mayor Brown, members of City Council. Tonight, I'm going to go through a bit of a recap of the 2020 flood fight and actually a little bit of insight as to sometimes what goes on with that flood fight and some of those considerations. So anyway, this is an update here for April 20th. Just going back and recapping, one of our first meetings that we had was back in January, I think about the 20th. We ended up bringing together some of the small group staff, and we looked at just an overview of the flood fight process, our flood situation, and kind of created a general incident command process. The next meeting that we had was mid-February, and that's when we were getting information from the Weather Service. So just recapping, then at that point in time, their 50% of exceeding the number was 48.9. Exceedance of 25% was 51.9. And what caused me some trepidation is the 1.5% chance was 60 feet, which is at the top of our levees. And the weather forecast, the National Weather Service long-term forecast at that time was for cold and wet. So really you're looking at something beyond the 50 percentile as a flood fighter, your chances. So basically then we were doing our planning activity based on major floods. Again, anticipated top 5 flood. So that meant that we were anticipating having things ready for what I call a rapid response processes, which are sandbags and clay to address unexpected conditions. While we didn't make any recommendations to actually do anything with the 60-foot levee action, we did task a consultant to update the 3-foot flood raise. If you remember, our levees are able to add another 3 feet over and above the what's on our flood walls, so we can top off another 3 feet. So we started that planning activity, and then we also did some activities on options for doing some protection in Shady Ridge, because at those elevations there would be some wet roads and things out in that area. So skipping ahead to the end of November, end of February, I should say, the Weather Service started downgrading their forecasts a little bit, or their outlooks, and that was basically because, if you remember right, we weren't getting any precipitation at that time. But we did move ahead with, we had the contractor produce 10,000 sandbags for a rapid response sandbag operation. There was a conscious effort made at that point in time. That's when the COVID-19 activity was just really kind of starting. And it was a conscious effort there that we wanted to make sure that our public works staff that were mission critical for operating pump stations and stop logs and things like that, we didn't want them to be exposed into that larger community environment that you might otherwise have with a sandbagging operation. About that same time, the staff, you remember we were talking about, they were cutting ice in some of those stations and doing some of those early flood fighting activities. So I'll skip then towards the end of March, early April. If you remember, the flood rise started coming very, very quickly at that point in time. And basically the first week of April is when they started showing a 46.5 foot potential flood crest. And during that period of time, all those actions were going on where the staff at the appropriate levels were turning on pump stations, they're shutting gates, and they started putting up stop logs and those kinds of things. Obviously, the biggest one there is Demers Avenue. One thing I want to talk about a little bit on is risk and uncertainty with flood fights. If you remember, during that same week, we got 10 inches of very, very wet snow. That was about a 1 and a 1.5 to 1.5 inch precipitation, a liquid equivalent. That event really hit the radar with only a few days notice with the Weather Service. And we were very, very lucky that came as snow. What happened when it had snow is it didn't melt. It gave us about 2 days of non-melting snow for the river and the legal drains and all those things to kind of catch up with what was going on at the time. It took about 2 days for that snow to melt, which then it gave that whole system an ability to kind of deal with and push some of that water through. Weather Service didn't run any numbers on it, but I think if that had come as rain, I think we'd have been well over 50 feet, just because it comes at you so quick and so fast. As it was, that snow event pushed us to about 47.7 on April 10th. So really things at that point, then things went down rather quickly. The staff quickly started removing stop logs, and we basically run the flood fight in reverse. Fast forwarding to today, as the mayor mentioned, we're about 36.5 feet on the flood gauge. All the stop logs have been removed. The pump stations have basically all been turned off, with the exception of 15th and Belmont and the one at English Coulee. And those two will probably be turned off tomorrow. Again, that's just a matter of matching the river elevations on the way down. Probably the biggest thing that we have that's going to be happening here on the flood fight will now revert basically to the Greenway crew. The Greenway, obviously some of those trails and things are still wet. The Greenway is open, but there's many of the trails that aren't available. The good thing is with this flood fight, all of the people basically that are involved have been through these flood fights before. They've gotten very, very good at operating the machinery, so to speak, the flood fighting machinery, I'll call it, be it the street crew, the water crew, Greenway crew, EOC. We did our first virtual EOC this year, not EOC flood fight, I should say. And Kari Gels did an excellent job of bringing that together, again, as part of the social distancing COVID-19 responses. So with that, that's my report, unless there's any other questions.
Any questions for Mr. Grasser? Any comments? Thank you, Mr. Grasser.
Yep.
Next, we go to item 2.2,
COVID-19 update.
and then Public Health Director Debbie Swanson.
Thank you, Mayor Brown and members of the City Council. Mayor Brown, I want to thank you for recognizing Ken Schultz tonight. He was the director of the Grand Forks Public Health Department when I started as a public health nurse here in Grand Forks 35 years ago. So I saw Ken last September in Minot, and we had a nice visit about Grand Forks. So thank you for remembering him this evening. I have a presentation that I will ask John Bernstrom to pull up. And while he's doing that, I'll just let you know that it's been a very, very busy time for us at Grand Forks Public Health Department. And I'll give you a brief overview. I know I've spoken with some of you individually, answered some questions, and I'll be available for questions after this and as well by email if you have any follow-up questions. So this is the update as of today, and you can advance to the next slide, John. This is just a really quick snapshot of where we're at globally at 2.4 million cases globally. There's been 167,369 deaths. The U.S. cases are just under 750,000. U.S. deaths at 35,000 and U.S. recovered at 70,337. And you can go to the next slide, John. This is the COVID-19 testing report for the state of North Dakota today. So you can see with 1,117 daily tests completed, that is a phenomenal number that our state health department has been able to accomplish. It may be also augmented by some private testing. I'm not exactly certain about that. But this is a way more than we've seen as a throughput on any other single day, I'm sure. There were 42 positive test results today. And then you can see on that slide each one of the other indicators for total positive cases to date at 627, total tests at 14,747, 13 deaths in our state, unfortunately. 53 cases that did at some point require hospitalization, with 17 of them currently still in the hospital, and 189 individuals have recovered. You can see Grand Forks, along with Cass County, are the two two counties in our state with the most cases right now. And next slide, please. This is just an overview of a slide that's testing by county, some highlights. In Grand Forks at the bottom, there is 1,469 tests have been completed. So we're well up there with the other counties of Burleigh and Cass. And our total positive cases in Grand Forks County is now at 138. And when I reported to you last Monday, we were at 11. So I think we all know it's been a busy week and this past week, and I'll get to that in just a moment, but the Grand Forks County case count is 25.7 of the total cases in North Dakota. And next slide, please. This is a slide of the source of exposure. Community spread continues to outpace all other categories, with close contact being a second. Household contact and under investigation are the same, and travel has really dropped off. So travel is not really considered as much of a concern at this point in time because there's fewer and fewer people traveling, and they have to self-quarantine for 14 days when they return to North Dakota or come to North Dakota. And that has been really helpful in preventing the spread through travel. But the community spread is concerning, obviously, because what we know is that this virus gets a foothold and then it does spread within the community if we're not just incredibly careful about that social distancing messaging that we give and the importance of washing hands and wearing masks and all of those recommendations. And you can go to the next slide, please, John. These are the cases by age, and you can see once again the 30 to 39 age group is the largest at 174 cases, and then it's spread out among 20 to 29, 40 to 49, and lesser in the 50 to 59, 60 to 69. And I know I had a question last week about that 30 to 39 age group. And although I don't have this confirmed, I think we could say with some certainty that it's likely because it's a lot of people in the workforce, and we are finding that healthcare workers and now work sites are becoming an issue for us in North Dakota. And then the next slide, please. These are hospitalizations by age. It continues to still be people 50 and older as being most likely to be hospitalized. But we still have a few cases, one case in 0 to 9, one in 10 to 19, and 2 cases in 20 to 29. So while we believe it's still a disease that doesn't cause us severe symptoms in children and healthy young people, it can pose a problem and they may still require hospitalization. Next slide, please. Of the 1,469 tests and 138 positive tests in Grand Forks. We know that 10 of them are household contact, 2 of them are confirmed travel, 2 are possible travel, 21 are close contact, 40 are community spread, and then that large number, 63 under investigation. And that's largely because we just received cases over the weekend, a large number of them. And so the contact tracing and investigation has just begun on those cases. And then the next slide. I'd like to give a shout out to Greta and the Public Information Center for creating this slide and this visual that describes the numbers that came out of the LM Wind Power test event. As you know, we did that test event on Thursday of last week. It was a very busy day. We were fortunate to have the National Guard come to Grand Forks and provide the testing. We provided some local logistics, and we collaborated with all those partners there you see on the left side of the screen. It was quite an endeavor, and we had some other city departments involved, and I thank them for that support. Some local public health partners in our region. And then we did also have a team from the Centers for Disease Control. And because they were healthcare providers, they jumped right in and helped with testing, as did our Grand Forks health officer, who brought his nurse with him and also performed several of the tests. The total number that were tested was 426 at that event. 323 were negative. 4 were rejected at the lab, and 99 were positive out of that event. But there were another 29 tests that were completed by area healthcare facilities. That's largely Altru Health System and Spectra Health. So combined with the 99, that gives us the 128 positive results. 11 of those are Minnesota residents. The 4 samples that were rejected at the lab were either because of the transportation of the sample or the collection of the sample. They were damaged when they arrived in Bismarck and weren't able to be tested. And we are in the process of contacting those individuals. And you can go to the next slide, please. I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of some of the things that have been keeping us busy at Grand Forks Public Health Department. And this is largely just the last week. All of our other activities are still ongoing, but we did establish a local joint information center, and that's led by Tiffany Baseboog at the health department. And the Public Information Center personnel are involved, and then we've collaborated with all of the entities in Grand Forks and the county that have a public information officer, and they're meeting weekly now to determine messages, collaborate on the content for news conferences, and address concerns that arise so that we can be very targeted in all of our messaging, whether it's social media or websites or any updated information that we need. And we're supported by a state joint information center too. The bulk of our work right now is really on the current contact tracing efforts. We have 16 staff that are trained. All 16 of them have assignments, and many of them also have another role in our incident command system, either in planning or logistics or something else. And other state and regional partners are also helping us with conducting tracing of Grand Forks County residents. We're coordinating with the Department of Human Services on quarantine and isolation of individuals experiencing homelessness. This was something that we did early on with the assistance of the city attorney, and we established hotels that were able to house individuals that couldn't be in congregate settings. And this included transportation, which we still need assistance with, shelter, food, and some case management. But fortunately, the Department of Human Services has recently stood up an effort to take on much of that work, and we will be responsible for determining people that need quarantine and isolation in local hotels, and we'll be providing some meal services there that are donated by the Northlands Rescue Mission and the Salvation Army. And the state will take on many of the other responsibilities, such as housing and case management, which will be greatly appreciated. The last couple of slides, you can go to the next one, are just some of our same messages that we've had all along on everyday tips for COVID-19 prevention, including hand washing, staying home if you're sick, covering your cough, being 6 feet apart from others. And then the next slide is one that I repeat again because it does really promote that physical distancing and personal responsibility. Lastly, I just included our COVID-19 hotline information. That's still current. All of those hotlines are busy. The Grand Forks Public Health Department line, which operates Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., has received 274 calls right now. That does not include direct calls that go to individuals who are doing contact tracing. This is just hotline information calls, the general public. And then the last two slides are just our resources again. So I do want to share with you a little bit more detail on our contact tracing and what happened over the weekend as well. It's not on the slides, but as of this morning, we are currently monitoring 66 positive cases and 172 close contacts, and an additional 10 cases have recovered. So we continually have people that have recovered from COVID-19, and 26 of our contacts were released from monitoring. We have 17 employees now. I think the slide said 16, but we're always adding more people that are helping us with that effort. And I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has anything that they would like more information on.
Thank you, Public Health Director. Any questions for Deb? I see Mr. Sandy.
You're muted.
Mr. Sandy, you're still muted.
Can you unmute?
My apologies, my space bar didn't work. I'm wondering about information regarding the definition of recovered. When we add people to the list of recovered, what defines someone that's recovered?
I'm going to get back to you on that specific definition because I don't want to misspeak about it. There are specific guidelines that the State Health Department has used for definition of recovered. And I don't know it off the top of my head, but I'll be happy to send a message to everyone. And then we can also include it in our social media. What does it mean to be recovered from this?
Great. I'm wondering, in addition to people feeling healthy, is there a test that says, okay, you've recovered, that sort of thing, or like a definitive, or is it somebody's feeling better? That's not a question. Those are the things I'm thinking about.
Sure, and I can answer that. We don't do a test to determine that people are recovered simply because we reserve that PCR testing to determine who's currently infectious. But there is testing that is done after a person has recovered to determine if they have antibodies. And that testing is really important because now we believe that that will help to lead to some treatment for individuals who are currently infected. So antibody testing allows us to determine that a person has had the disease, and it's done at a different point in time.
So Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind, how prevalent is the availability of that antibody testing?
I don't know the specifics of that. It's relatively new because we haven't had recovered cases all that long, but I can certainly get back to you with information about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Yes, Mr. Weber.
You know,
Oh, Ms. Swanson first, then Mr. Weber.
I did want to mention, I think you may have seen in our slide there that we had 11 cases as a result of the testing event that reside in Minnesota. And we have been in touch with our partners both at the state and local level to ensure all those individuals have follow-up as well.
Good.
Can you
Mr.
help me
Weber?
understand? Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Swanson, can you help me to understand the distinction between close contact and community spread?
Close contact is considered somebody that you have had contact with. We are describing it as somebody that you have been in contact with for more than 10 minutes and within 12 feet. So that would be people that you have worked with, people that are we also call household contacts, people that we spend a significant amount of time with. So there's household contacts, close contacts. Community spread is basically that we don't know where you got the disease. It's undetermined or it's under investigation. We rule out travel, we rule out close contacts. You pick this disease up somewhere in the community.
Thank you. Any further questions for Ms. Swanson?
Yes,
Yes,
I
Ms.
have a question for Ms. Swanson. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With the events over the weekend and a rapid and escalated incident of testing, how are we doing in relation to the availability of test kits? And if we're facing a more difficult situation now, what can we do to get some assistance from the state or the federal government?
After our testing event, we did request more test kits for All True Health System, and they did arrive over the weekend, as I understand it, because they continue to do testing at their curbside drive-through testing. They have assured us that they have enough right now for what they see as potential from this particular worksite testing and what will follow along, but we have the ability to request more from the state, and I think there's always more coming, as is evidenced by that very large number of tests that were completed across the state today. The state health department has reached out to All True and made sure that they have enough.
Ms. Mock?
Thank you. Yeah, with the mass testing event, are there any plans to do another mass testing of LM employees and maybe some spot testing at other large employers that may have similar working conditions, like a Simplot, or with a positive at the mill and elevator to spot check to make sure we don't have other outbreaks in the community?
We have discussed this with the state health department, and they have not indicated that they feel a need for it right now because they're looking at the entire state and what the needs are across the state and what the resources are of the National Guard. We would not have the resources at Grand Forks Public Health Department to do a large testing event like that. I think because of the large number that came in on one day, they felt it was really important to get ahead of that and get a sense of what was happening. The state health officer has since issued a quarantine order for all employees at LM Wind Power. So quarantining is one of our best tools that we can do. We can safely assume that a large number of people have been exposed, and we recommend that they stay home. If they become symptomatic, then they can be tested. There aren't any plans to do testing at other work sites unless something changes.
And does that quarantine order, does that also extend to immediate family?
Well, the quarantine order only covers the employees, the order from the state health officer. But when we do contact tracing and there is a positive case in a household, then we also recommend a quarantine for their family members, yes.
Thank you. Any further questions for our public health director? Mr. Weber?
Yes. So my understanding is all the testing that we're currently doing, whether it's someone who's showing symptoms and being tested, or the quarantining that we're doing, those are both reactive. These are after we suspect that someone may be infected. We currently don't have any proactive or we don't have any proactive measures at this point, other than hand washing and wearing a mask and social isolating, social distancing.
Those are our best tools when we have a large population that has no immunity to a novel virus.
Mr. Sandy?
Mr. Mayor, I don't know if this is so much a question for Ms. Swanson as it is a statement. Many of us have been receiving comments and questions and different input from not only citizens in Grand Forks, but business owners asking about recovery efforts and the city's ability to allow businesses to reopen in whatever fashion they feel is safe, in a safe environment. I know currently we're under a state health emergency, and so until the governor relinquishes authority to the local level, we will continue to follow the state guidelines. Are you or is public health working on any sort of a plan so that when the governor says the cities have their own authority, the public health is going to be able to say, okay, the city of Grand Forks can start opening, so we think it should be XYZ? Or do you believe that another group or even businesses should be coming to the city to bring us their ideas on how we could implement a phased approach to reopening the local economy?
Well, part of government is listening, so I think we're open to ideas, but I think it'll be, again, based on the time when we feel it's safe to reopen. So we're certainly open to ideas.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, but I'm wondering is public health working on any of that? But I assume that's not in the purview of our public health administration. Is that accurate, Ms. Swanson?
Well, what I can tell you is there are several documents out there that are making recommendations for communities as to when they can begin to reopen things. And I don't have it in front of me now. I know there's one by the American Enterprise. There's a few others too. And a lot of them have recommendations such as you are not seeing any increase cases, that you flatten the curve in essence, that your hospitalized patients are getting better. There's certain indicators that are all used to determine that. And I certainly hope that our community would consider those recommendations before moving forward. And I think we'll see them perhaps at a state level as well. But we have to keep in mind that some communities have a lot more cases and community spread than others in North Dakota. So people are going to be ready at different points in time too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I'm sorry if I may, Mr. Mayor. I completely agree. Each community it has a different set of circumstances, different spread. Each community should be thinking about these things and dealing with them at the local level, so that because in this situation, one size does not necessarily fit all. I just think that it's important. It's important that we start planning for the future, even though we don't know when the governor will give authorization for us at a local level to start opening businesses back up. Nor do I have any idea which businesses would make the most sense to open first and what level of precautions they should be taking. I do think, though, that at some point, we as a community desperately need to have businesses reopen. Every day that goes by is another day where we lose significant amount of sales tax. More people are out of work. More people become financially struggled. More people are becoming, getting into issues with housing, and the list goes on. And so, although we need to be very sensitive to the public health side, we also need to be sensitive to the people on the financial side that need to get themselves back working. So I'm hoping that as a community, several of us continue these conversations so that when the time comes that the governor says we're welcome to make the decision locally, that we actually have some thought process and a plan in place so that we can push the go button and actually have businesses reopening in a reasonable manner and timeline with the right safety precautions. And I appreciate the public health will always be there for a resource for us to help us make sure that the plans that we as a city councilor and the mayor are going to approve actually make sense on the safety side as well. Thank you, Ms. Swanson, for everything you're doing for our community.
Thank you. Any further comments?
Mayor, this is Ken. I have a question for Ms. Swanson. Are you familiar? I listened to the governor today talk about the North Dakota Smart Restart. Have you any information? Have you heard any about who's on that and what they're investigating or thinking about?
I did not see the news conference today because I was in meetings, but I have heard of the North Dakota Smart Restart, and I do not know the members of it, but I will see if I can get some information for you.
Okay, thank you. And one of the other things, at least you see on the news a lot of the issues. I think it's probably gotten better, but how are we doing in the community, like with personal protective equipment and even ventilators? It seems like we have more ventilators than we started out with. So it seems like we're pretty well prepared, but do we have the right inventory of those things?
I do believe we have the right inventory of ventilators, but it's always important to remember that we have to have a healthy workforce to be able to use ventilators because it takes a certain skill set to do that. So we have to protect our healthcare workers first and foremost. Personal protective equipment is in adequate supply. I would say that there are some conservation efforts going on where it's being reused in places where it can safely be done, and it's being disinfected in some other areas as well. So I believe there's a lot of conservation efforts to ensure that we have enough PPE for everybody who needs it. And that science is constantly evolving.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? Ms. Mock?
Are we, in an effort to try to be a little more proactive and get a handle on where we are now, but also maybe prepare for potential future outbreaks, or once this goes down a little bit and then we have a resurgence, is there any talk of guidelines, but going into businesses and making sure that things are as good as they can be, or suggestions? Is there any sort of resource for people to go to if they have issues or feel uncomfortable?
Most of the recommendations that we've been making for the residents as well as the business community or industries is contained on the CDC website. So they're very specific to any type of industry, whether it's long-term care or an industrial site or schools. And we have provided that information to the Chamber of Commerce to share with their members. All True Health Systems Employer Solutions is going to do some targeted communication to businesses so that they're aware of what they need to do. What we're asking people to do now might be slightly modified as things reopen and as we learn more about what works. And in other countries where things have started to reopen again, there's some lessons learned there as well. As a public health department, we're always looking ahead, and we know what our next big challenge will be. We'll be getting vaccines into the arms of our population as quickly as possible once one is developed, because that's when we really can say with a lot of confidence that we'll be protected and we'll be able to do all those things that we want to do to recover. But that may be a little while yet.
Thank you. Any further comments? Mr.
If I may.
Weber?
Thanks for taking all of our questions. Of course, this is a top of mind topic, so thank you. First of all, we've mentioned quarantining. Can you discuss enforcement mechanisms for quarantining, and then also the CARES 19 contact tracing app? Has that been utilized to any benefit at this point?
Well, I'll answer the last one first. I have the CARES app on my phone, but I don't go anywhere, so it doesn't show me anything other than my own residence, other than to walk the dog. The CARES app is something that the state rolled out. I would encourage people to sign up for it. I think there may be some benefit to it. I haven't heard a lot about it since it's been launched. As far as quarantine and isolation, once again, quarantine is for people who are at risk of the disease because they've been exposed. Isolation is for people who actually have tested positive or are ill with symptoms of the disease. And enforcement of that has provisions in state law, and our state health officer has exercised that for a particular population here in Grand Forks. I'll tell you my experience with quarantine and isolation, and then I'll let the city attorney add to it if he would like to add more to it. we have had some experience with issuing orders on an individual basis to individuals in a past TB outbreak. And we found that once we utilized the legal process, it really got attention, and people obliged and paid attention to it and did what they needed to do to stay home and complete. It was really more of a case of completing treatment at that point. So there is provision for it. I'll let the city attorney speak to how it might be applied in this situation. As a health department, we are constantly monitoring people, so we get information from them about, are they staying home and what are they doing? And we're hearing already that people are reporting individuals that they know aren't maintaining it. So that's what I can tell you about how we will enforce it. Certainly there may be a law enforcement component to it.
Mr. Swanson?
Thank you, Mayor. I think there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding about the enforcement of an order issued by the state health officer. In order to enforce that, if you wish to go into district court for a misdemeanor charge, that would be prosecuted through the state's attorney's office. We may consider, which we've done in a previous incident, issuing an order directly naming particular persons from the local health officer. We would then have a little more flexibility on our enforcement, including a civil commitment type procedure where we get an order from a district court judge requiring that specifically named individual to remain in isolation. That has a little more teeth in it than simply the state health officers' generic orders or class orders. One of the difficulties in enforcing the class order, for example, the order that recently came out, is you would have to establish, number one, that this individual was covered by the order. So you'd have to show that they are in fact an LM employee and that they were on the date that the order was issued. So that's an extra component that fits into any prosecution or enforcement. That's why I've had discussions very recently with the state's attorney on how we would consider approaching that. And I think we may use different approaches depending upon the need and the circumstances as they arise. Law enforcement may be involved, they may not be involved. The probable cause filing with the court may come from the health department employees, it may come from general public members, it may come from law enforcement. So there is a process. It typically involves district court. There is a hybrid option that we would have. It would take some additional action either by the city council or the mayor to use municipal court. We don't think right now that that's appropriate to go that way. It just adds another direction. So we are planning on, if the need arises, using district court. I hope to have further internal policies, if you will, in our office on how we'll handle that in conjunction with the state's attorney's office. I think both of our offices would be involved in some form or fashion, but there is both a criminal perspective that can be utilized for enforcement, and there is a civil perspective that can be used for enforcement. There is one thing, and I think the question came up earlier, and that is specifically with regard to LM wind power. The order is very specific to a class of individuals that are governed. It is not individually specific. I don't know if that helps, Mr. Weber, in your understanding, but it is something that our office has experience with from prior incidents involving TB. It is something the state's attorney's office has prior involvement or experience with, and we have been in communication on how we move forward if the need arises.
Very thorough. Thank you. It was a constituent question about enforcement. And CARES 19, very easy to download on your phone. Was wondering if that was useful from a public health perspective. So thanks for all that information. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further comments? If not, we'll go to 2.3.
I have one question for you, Ms. Swanson. What about the LM outbreak for COVID-19? What instigated the state stepping in to do mass testing there that wasn't kind of triggered by the current testing that's going on by the mill? Why is that different? Is it because we're still waiting for those tests to come back?
What I can tell you triggered the state's involvement in the LM wind power testing was that 7 or 8, I'm not sure the exact numbers, some of them may have been Minnesota, cases were reported to our department in a very short period of time. And how it was discovered was through the contact tracing process. So as our staff started to call individuals or multiple, it became apparent that there were several common workplaces or a common workplace. So the state health department called us that evening and said, we think there's a cluster. We really want to investigate it. We've ramped up some testing efforts with the National Guard, and we'd like to bring that to your community. They also wanted to do some surveillance testing. I'm not aware of a cluster of cases at another place. If that is happening, I'm not aware of it. I know of a case at the North Dakota Mill, and that was reported in the newspaper yesterday. And so one case may not become a cluster and may not require that. Does that answer your question?
It does. So if we had, let's say, 7 cases that were diagnosed at the mill within a week, that would flag the state to come and say, let's do another mass testing? It's a guess because we've only had one.
I don't think it would be that simple. I think it would be depend on resources, how many people needed to be tested. We knew there was a large workforce of 880 employees, so we knew there was a strong need to test many more. I think only time will tell if we have another situation where something pops up, but I think what we'd really like to do is just get the attention of everyone who owns and operates a business in our community that they need to follow all the guidance and as strictly as possible. Prevention would avoid the need for it.
Thank you for saying that, because I think with what Mr. Sandy was saying about wanting to open up for businesses so that they can try to recover some of those losses, and then we as a city too, from sales tax, that is all extremely important. But at the same time, businesses have to do their part as well in protecting their employees and in turn protecting the larger community. If we're not protecting our grocery store workers, our essential workers to the utmost of our ability, those are the people that are coming into the most contact with everyone in our community. And so if we're not, they don't have masks, if they don't have gloves when that they're working, and they don't have proper training to understand that cross-contamination can happen with their gloves, if they're not using hand sanitizer regularly after each customer that they're helping or client that they're helping, all of these help to prevent the spread. And if that isn't being done regularly and it isn't being controlled, that will only kind of elongate this time period of us trying to social distance because we're not doing it wholeheartedly.
Thank you. All good points. Any more questions for our Public Health Director? If not, we'll go to 2.3.
Census update.
Mr. Gangler.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I just have a few things to bring forward in terms of an update. Starting with some good news. Over the weekend and then just now within the past half hour, I received some additional information from the National League of Cities for the grant that we applied for. And I'll probably find out more, but it looks like we could receive, we did request $10,000 for the grant, which would be used to assist with purchasing the social media ads and a whole variety of different ways. Where that comes into play, I should also note, I did get confirmation from UND just about an hour ago that they are still working on the residence halls and the community apartments. So in other words, when we look at that individual response rate for those 2 census tracts, I think it's safe to say that we need to kind of hold tight on making any judgment calls until they get their group quarters turned into the national census. A couple dates to keep in mind. Originally, the self-response rate for the census was due to close on July 31st. And because of all of the changes now, October 31st is actually going to be the end of the self-response. Group quarters has shifted from June 5th to September 3rd. And although there's a whole lot of dates that changed, one of the more significant ones to point out is that prior to the COVID pandemic, December 31st would have been the day that the census results are turned over, presented to the president. That day now has switched over to April 30th of 2021. So we envision a sort of a long process moving forward. And John, I just have one slide to show.
Yeah, go ahead and share your screen, Brad.
Okay. This bar chart is something that we do have on our city website.
It's not shared, Brad. You need to go to share your screen at the bottom of your.
Okay. So the blue bars represent the total U.S. population based on 2010 census, and the green bars are as of yesterday, I believe those numbers are. So in terms of North Dakota, as a state, we're at 55.5%. Based on 2010, that was 68.8%. And the UND rate, again, stressing the idea that we shouldn't put too much into this number just yet, but it's a little over 40%. And then still waiting to confirm a few things from the air base. Here's a quick up to date just on some of the larger communities in the state. Grand Forks, we're somewhere in the middle, so to speak, but we do hope that as we move on, we'll able to utilize some of those that grant money to hopefully pursue more options. Unless there's any questions, that's all I have.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Mr. Weber?
Mr. Gangler, I'm hearing from students they were disappointed about having to, or not being able to come back to campus. That disappointment is in some cases evolving to bitterness. And I'm hearing stories about students intentionally choosing not to fill out the census or using a home address rather than a Grand Forks address because some misguided effort to punish UND or the city. I know that you're working with Melanie Linder and other officials at UND on the census. Can you give us an update on efforts there? Because those
Sure,
numbers do seem a little low right now.
Yeah, I guess I'm not aware of those types of concerns being expressed. As far as I know, we still have some direct lines of communication with UND. The census itself is still stressing the idea, and I'm reading something right from a brochure explaining to people, relatives you may stay with during school breaks or during temporary school closures should not count you in their census questionnaire. So, the message has been out there that even though you're on a temporary break, but in terms of trying to address the that attitudinal adjustment, I guess I haven't heard much.
You are working with UND officials though, right?
Yes.
Maybe you'd pass along that you'd heard on the grapevine, but there may be some of that bitterness out there. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Gangler? If not, we'll go on to item 3, public hearings and second readings of ordinances, 3.1.
Public hearing on 2020 CDBG and Community Service Grant Programs, approval of 2020 to 24 consolidated plan, citizen participation plan, and analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. It is asked that this item be tabled.
So I'll open the public hearing on 3.1. Close the public hearing on 3.1. Council action on 3.1. Mr. Weber motions, second. Ms. Marshall, thank you. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion tabled, thank you. 3.2.
Public hearing and second reading of ordinance, dedicate rights of way on plat of Highland Point 6 edition.
So Mr. Gangler?
Yeah, Mayor Brown, I'll have items 3.2 through 3.5 in terms of those items. I guess I would just like to maybe proceed. If there are any specific questions, I can pull up some information, but if not, I would leave that to the council's discretion.
Okay, so I'll open the public hearing on 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 3.5. I'll close the public hearing on 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 3.5. Any questions for Mr. Gangler or any comments from council? Mr. Weber motions, Mr. Sandy seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, carries. Thank you. 3.6.
Determine insufficiency of protest on paving district 747, project 8182, reconstruction of Belmont Road from 55th to 62nd Avenue South. This item is to be tabled to May 4th due to change in project timeline.
Thank you. I'll open the public hearing on 3.6. I'll close the public hearing on 3.6. Council action on 3.6.
Ken, I'll move approval.
Sandy motions, Marshall seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, carries. Thank you. Item 4, who action items pull for discussion? I will pull 4.7. If not, that leaves for 1, for 2, for 3, for 4, for 5, for 6, for a motion and a second. We have a motion and a second. Mr. Weigel motions. Second, Mr. Weber. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed,
Aye.
carries. Thank you. Opposed, carries. Thank you. 4.7,
A city's area transit federal operations funding update.
Mr. Berg. Dale, are you there? Oh,
Hello, Mayor.
Yes,
and
sir.
Council members. Just a quick update on what we have received for funding. We did receive 3.37 million from the CARES Act. That is to help in operations and also capital items that we would need for help during this COVID pandemic that we've got going on, which would include anything that would help with our operations if we had to use phone service to be moved, if we had to purchase a vehicle, or if we ended up having to buy any equipment that we would need for PPEs for our own employees, or to disinfect our building and or the vehicles themselves. We also received the regular grant that we would normally get at a 50-50 rate, which is 50% local funds and 50% from the federal government. And we just need to make sure that we put that in the budget and also do a budget amendments as needed for both of those grants. The CARES Act grant, I just want to let you know, is 100% federal dollars. There is no local match needed for that one.
Thank you. Council action on 4.7. A motion and a second. Mr. Weigel.
Move approval.
Mr.
Second.
Weigel motions, Mr. V in seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, carries. Thank you. Any introductions to ordinance tonight, Maureen?
Yes, Mayor, we need to introduce ordinance on 4.1.
4.1, Mr. Sandy motions to accept that. And then item 5, informational items, 5.1.
Investment portfolio summary as of March 31st.
And then 5.2.
And that's a statement of changes in cash balance for 12/31/2019, as well as January 31st, 2020.
Thank you. Item 6, approval of the minutes and bills, 6.1.
We have the vendor list and engineer's estimate that's as presented.
The motion and a
Move approval.
second to pay the bills. Mr. Sandy motion, second. For approval of the bills, Ms. Marshall, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, thank you. The bills are paid. Item 7, city administrator comments, Mr. Phelan.
you, Mayor Brown and members of City Council. Two, I think Mr. Sandy was speaking earlier regarding what is going to be our local strategy regarding the restart. So we have begun to discuss that. And if you hear Governor Burgum, he talks about 3 principles: state-led, locally executed, and federally supported. And I think on the restart, we're certainly going to have guidelines from the President Trump's administration. We're going to have a state-led strategy, but Governor Burgum is going to anticipate and expect that Grand Forks and other cities across the state move forward with a locally led action. So we're working on that. The other thing I wanted to discuss is we are working on budget, both the 2020 and 21. I've given you a couple updates on that. We're going to meet with Mayor Brown hopefully this week and discuss both the 2020 budget adaptation and also look at the 21. And of course, we want the City Council engaged as part of that. So in future meetings, we'll make sure that you guys are updated And as per the mayor, wanted to make sure we're collaborative to have your input on that. But we're working on some plans and some actions on that. We'll meet with the mayor hopefully this week, and in future meetings of city council, we'll have some briefings for you on all those matters. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Item 8, mayor and council member comments. Councilman Weigel.
Just briefly, Mayor, I just wanted to say thank you to all of our healthcare workers, our essential personnel, our first responders, and everybody in between. They're doing a fantastic job, and know that as a city, we're here to support you.
Thank you. Ms. Dockler.
I would echo the same statements that Danny made. I know that they are all sacrificing to be out there, and they have their own worries and concerns about the safety of their families as well. And so I just want them to know that it is not unnoticed, and it is deeply appreciated by everybody in the community. I also would like to ask if there's any way that we as a city could encourage, ask for more tests, which I'm sure everybody is asking right now, so that we can be more proactive in our testing of essential facilities, so that we can be ahead of the curve as opposed to just reacting. If there's any way that I can be of help in doing that, or anybody on this Zoom call, or I'm sure in the community as well, we would be more than happy to do that.
Thank you. Councilman Weber.
Thank you to everyone providing service in the community, including grocery store cashiers and folks picking up our garbage. It's a job that doesn't always get recognized, particularly a troubling job at this time. So thanks to everyone doing their work out there.
Councilwoman Mock.
Thank you. We did have a listening session on housing. So I would encourage people, if they have specific issues that they are noticing that maybe we're not talking enough about, that they reach out to someone, so that we can help organize those various listening sessions and start paying attention to different issues. We do have a lot of issues, and of course the uncertainty makes it difficult to know exactly what the right approach is, but that doesn't mean we can't talk about some of those issues and see just kind of what's out there and what we need to be aware of and planning for. Given some of the news today, I think oil prices are something we all need to be aware of, and that will certainly affect the state, but it will also really affect things like prairie dog funding and resources going forward. So in addition to sales tax and state aid, I think we also have to watch oil prices and all the various budgetary issues that may have in putting forth the next budget. And I think as we look forward to reopening and different plans like that, the testing will become more and more important. But also, I think we're going to need to hear from various people and their ideas on that, and then also have public health look at that for various stages. So maybe we can have tiered approaches in case we do have outbreaks that come at a later date, just so we can have the flexibility to try to get the economy going again, but also respond as needed from a public health concern.
Thank you. That listening session on housing was wonderfully informative. So thank you, Councilwoman Dockler and Mock, on that listening session. Councilwoman Marshall.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on what Councilwoman Mock was talking about, and your recognition, Mayor Brown, of the great listening session that occurred last Friday, and thank you to both Councilwoman Mock and Dockler for coordinating that effort, for bringing it to the forefront. And I think in our effort to recognize the impact on businesses, which is hugely, hugely important, and it affects all the workers within our community, there are legions of people who are out there every day, not only providing the direct medical care, but assisting people who are really struggling and would struggle regardless, but now with the COVID-19 are struggling even more. And what I don't know is always recognized is that there are people who are out there doing that work who don't have the option to keep social isolation or social distancing. Certainly can use protective equipment, but may not, because of the nature of the supports that people need, be able to have that avoidance of that close physical contact. So I just wanted to note that. Certainly there were some great ideas. There was great sharing between the agencies that were involved in the listening session. I think everybody came away with a much deeper knowledge of what's available out there. But I also think that it was very informative from a policy standpoint in terms of how we think about utilizing the additional CDBG dollars that are coming in as a result of the COVID-19. And so again, thanks for sponsoring that session. It was very helpful.
I agree. Thank you. Council Vice President Vian.
Yeah, a few comments I'd like to make. I think a lot has been said, and much thank you to all the health professionals. And I also like to say to the support staffs who have been working so hard with the COVID-19 pandemic. It's just been unbelievable, the work that they've done and the benefits we've had. I would also like to say congratulations to Mr. Grasser, the engineers, Public Works, and all those in the flood fight. Again, we had a significant flood event, and it happened almost under the radar. Most people didn't even realize that we had that large of an event, and it was taken care of quite well. And so much thanks there. And then one other thing that I guess I was involved in last week that kind of is a little bit more away from all the emergencies is that I am the council representative on the Lake Hagasu Water Authority. And Friday we had a meeting where we approved a cooperative agreement with Garrison Diversion for the Red River Valley water supply that will pave the way for future agreements that will come back to the city. John Shockley, the attorney for LAWA, was at one of our meetings a month or so ago and explained a little bit what was happening. And so that agreement was approved by LAWA. It still has to be approved by Garrison. And it's actually not as urgent as all the other issues that we have going on, but the importance is a significant drought impact would have a $2 billion per year impact on the state of North Dakota. So in the light of all the other things that are going on, some of these other issues are still moving forward. So I wanted to give everybody an update on that too. Thank you.
Thank you. Can't forget Waterworks, or I won't hear the end of it. So Council President Sandy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, thank you goes to Mr. Veen for his help on that. That's obviously a very big issue for our community. And yeah, the non-event, one of the 10 largest floods being a non-event, can't say enough thank yous to the North Dakota Dream Team for all the funding that they got for our flood protection, greatest $400 million purchase we've ever had. I'm just going to mention that I appreciate Mr. Phelan mentioning that he's working on budget planning. With the current status of oil being, they're apparently giving oil away anywhere you want it. So with the current status, as Ms. Mock said, I don't even know how we can plan budgets without having any idea where we are. So Mr. Phelan, I'm looking forward to working with you on budget planning, you and Ms. Storstad and the mayor. It should be an interesting end of the year and next year. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you. Yes?
May I make a comment for the council?
Yes, Mr. Swanson.
The council may be aware that Grand Forks Herald has announced changes in its print publication. As a result of that change, the normal notices that the city prints in the legal notices now may have as much as a 2-week lead time, which is not practical to meet committee of the whole meetings, city council meetings, JDA meetings, and the like. So with the efforts of the finance department and my office, we are evaluating alternatives to the print notices, trying to determine what has to appear in print, what may be able to appear in electronic version of the Herald, and what we can shift over to the city's webpage, Facebook page, or services provided by the city. That is something that may require action either by the mayor or the council at a later date, but it is something rather significant that I think you needed to be aware of. That's why I raised it to your awareness, and we are working on it. I think that issue came to light on Friday, and over the weekend, my office did quite a bit of work on it. We aren't done with our analysis as to both requirements for publication under local ordinance, which obviously we have control over, and what publications are required under state law. So I think there will be more information on that somewhere down the road for the council and potential action either by the mayor or the council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, it's more important now than ever to follow CDC guidelines regarding COVID-19. We were saddened by the passing of Kenneth Schultz, former public health director, who had 29 years with the department, and Sergeant Cliff Phelps, a 32-year veteran of the police department. And with that, the river is now 36.5. Greenway is open. Please be careful on the trails or paths. And with that, we'll take a motion to adjourn. Mr. Sandy motions, Ms. Stockler quickly seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you. Have a good In this time of uncertainty,
one thing stands firm.
We've overcome adversity before,
and we will do it again.
But to come out of this bigger,
stronger,
we need your help.
Good citizens, we ask you to stay home.
Don't endanger your extended family,
your friends,
your neighbors.
Stay home.
Stay safe.